With it being the 46th anniversary of Star Wars' cinematic beginnings, and the 43rd anniversary of Return of the Jedi, it seemed appropriate to perform an analysis on the original trilogy in general, and a good subject for that would be on one of its most celebrated characters, Han Solo. Even those who love his character tend to boil down his arc to being a selfish scoundrel that learned to love and care for others beyond Chewbacca, and, while this is true, it does brush over many of the details that allow him to stand the test of time, as well as place overemphasis on his arc within The Empire Strikes Back. As I mentioned in the previous video, George Lucas loves to have characters act as mirrors to each other, and this is present with how Han interacts with Obi-Wan, in not just their initial opposing views of the Force, but how Kenobi's wisdom and competence impact Han later on. Because of the comedic tone of it, many may not realise how Han retreating from the room of stormtroopers is a growth from his previous desire to rush into a direct fight, when shown by Obi-Wan the importance of alternatives to fighting, with the latter's success in deactivating the Death Star's tractor beam. It's both through Obi-Wan's actions as well as Luke's heroism that Han comes to at least show respect for their belief in the Force by the time he reaches Yavin 4, even if not believing in it yet. And it's through the teamwork with Luke and the others needed to survive that helped create enough of bond for his return to save Luke be consistent with his arc, without the need to focus much on his internal conflict. On the subject of the Force, Han's disbelief in the Force is ironic in its becoming constantly more apparent throughout the trilogy, that the will of the Force as well as what amount of midichlorians he may have are what allow him to survive so many difficult situations. This is made more apparent through the special edition with Greedo's blaster fire missing Han, of which criticism of compared to the original is fairly absurd, with them essentially saying a man who is still a selfish smuggler of many illegal items, not killing Greedo in cold blood somehow ruins his arc, being the kind of lucky miss more associated with those sensitive to the Force, which will be relevant when discussing his role in Return of the Jedi. On to his place in The Empire Strikes Back. This is where the bulk of Han's character growth occurs, and where his complexity is best displayed. Though showing more camaraderie in his willingness to brave Hoth's code to save Luke, his debt to Jabba adds conflict with the possibility he could leave the rebellion. His struggle with fully accepting the help of others is shown best during the segment of the plot in which those on the Falcon are trying to escape Imperial pursuit. With Han's self-centered mindset when we first meet him, his trust and admiration for the Millennium Falcon can be seen as him seeing it as an extension of himself, with the criticisms levied against it or others attempting to command the course of it can be seen as him being forced to not rely on his own command, as he comes to adhere to the advice of even 3PO. It makes sense that this is the setting of the scenes in which he becomes more open towards his feelings for Leia, with him calling her by her name rather than a sarcastic title, and making advances on her with a mix of his roguish tendencies and a more personal side willing to form personal bonds with others, and eventually make a noble sacrifice for them. We also see him fully adhere to Obi-Wan's wisdom on the alternatives to fighting, in a manner less fused with his own recklessness, when hiding the Falcon in plain sight. On the subject of the events that come on Bespin, it's worth noting that more reflections come in the form of Lando, representing what Han was, as well as Boba Fett representing what Han could be if having stayed loyal to Jabba. More on the ties between Han, Boba and Jabba soon, when moving on to discussing Return of the Jedi. Before that, it's worth noting how Han's arc ties into the wider themes of the film. Han's struggle to accept his command of the Falcon being challenged, and his opening up to Leia, ties into the film's themes of having their characters' ideals tested, and having to reconsider them through failure. with Luke's training under Yoda destroying his preconceptions of what is possible with the Force, and him finding out about his parentage destroying his ideals on wanting to be like his father and destroy Vader. Or Leia's struggle to express her feelings for Han, coming from the pressures of needing to be a professional as a general of the rebellion, and experiencing a level of failure in the losses sustained in fleeing Hoth despite the successful operation. On to Return of the Jedi. This is what's considered by most to be a weak point for his character arc, and where many see it as better for him to have been killed off, including by his actor himself, due to his arc having been completed in Episode 5. This isn't something I can necessarily agree with though, with there being very important aspects within it for his arc to come full circle. Empire may have put in the work to bring him to the point of becoming a truly selfless hero, but it's in Jedi where we see the changes in his character this causes, such as him earnestly thanking Luke for saving him, and be willing to help Lando despite the latter's betrayal, when having an idea of what he's done to be there, and trusting in Luke's judgment. Whether consciously or not, we see Han putting trust in the will of the Force, when having his vision impaired, with him no longer putting his faith purely in what he can see, and, luckily not shooting Lando when saving him from the Sarlacc. But as we know, there's no such thing as luck, according to Obi-Wan. Indeed, Han's situation and success here, as much as Luke letting go of his conscious self and acting on instinct back in A New Hope, something far removed from Han's prior self. Though a very unceremonious victory over Boba Fett, Han managing to foil Boba is important when taking into account how the latter represents what he could be, as it symbolises his conscious self being overcome by his true nature forged from experiences. These changes continue to become apparent with his volunteering to lead the mission on Endor, and his friends choosing to go along with him rather than being forced by circumstances, as on Hoth. Letting go of the Falcon as part of his ego in letting Lando use it, putting more open trust in C-3PO's help, and patiently executing a strategy to complete their mission through reliance on others such as the Ewoks. That's not to say Han is entirely altered as a character though, with him still presenting moments of cheeky confidence, frustration with others, and quick wit, but it is now perfectly balanced with the catharsis of one who has found people he can call a family, and a cause he can dedicate himself to for the betterment of them, rather than just thinking solo. Overall, Han Solo is a display of a simplistic concept done well, in his transformation from a rogue only caring for himself and his co-pilot, to a team player open to being accepted into a family, all the while displaying the confidence and charm for characterization to remain strong throughout his whole arc. Thank you if having watched until the end, and thank you, George Lucas, for giving us this franchise. If there's enough demand, I will do more Star Wars related content in the future, and I'm open to requests for topics.